until the discussion. If you do have any technical difficulties coming up, we do have our colleague Andre in the chat who can help, so you can just write a message there and then we will give you some assistance. So that's the recording started. Everyone should see that now. So before we get started, we would like to ask you for some input. So we'd like to run a quick poll. So if you're on the laptop, this poll should pop up as a question that comes up. If you're using a phone to join the call, then if you go to the chat function, you'll see the poll there. So if we can launch the poll. Our question here is, why are you interested in today's event on behaviour change? Why is it important to you? And you've got a few different options here. Either you maybe work in behaviour change or communications, you might work in the circular economy more generally, it affects your work in some way, or maybe just general interest in the topic. So if you can share your results and press submit, then we can see what we've got. Okay, two sort of front runners here. The main one is that people work in the circular economy so far. There's still time to submit your answers if you want to. Quite a few, 31% working in behaviour change and communications, which is great because we'd love to hear from you and your experiences and ideas. A couple of people saying it affects their work and quite a few more saying that they're interested generally. Well, that's great. A good mixture there. Lots of different interests. And just to say, I think we can close the poll now, but to say that we would love to hear from you during this discussion. So please do add any questions you have to the chat and we can pick them up with our panelists later on. Okay. If you can move to the next slide, please, Claire. So this event is part of the European Circular Economy Stakeholder Platform, or the ECESP. This is an initiative of the European Commission and the European Economic and Social Committee, and it acts really as a network of networks. So it's about bringing people together, highlighting, promoting cross-sector opportunities, really to help accelerate that transition to the circular economy. And we're pleased to be part of the coordination group for the ECESP, and we're from the CSEP side co-chairing the leadership group on citizen engagement and circular behaviour together with the Rediscovery Centre, which Claire is representing today. And with that, I will pass over to Claire.
Fantastic. Thank you, Rosalind. So today what we wanted to do is share some of the findings from our work of the leadership group on citizen engagement and circular behaviour. And you'll find on the ECSP website all the different leadership groups or thematic areas that are ongoing as well. But on this particular group, what we've done is mapped out circular communications hubs right across Europe and really tried to understand how these hubs are successfully engaging with circular behaviour. And we then identified a number of hubs that would be really good to interview for podcasts. And we recorded 3 podcasts together with the European Circular Economy Stakeholder Platform Secretariat. And we interviewed for the Ezra Tapp from Zero Waste Europe, Odile, who's with us today from the EPA Ireland, and Vera Labou from Circular Flanders. And what we covered is everything from plastics to food waste, and we also looked at behaviours at individual, community, and business levels. The podcasts are now all available on Spotify if you search for Let's Talk an ECSP podcast, and they were also on that registration page for today's event, so you can find them there. And there's lots and lots of really fascinating insights in them. The event today is, of course, also part of our leadership group, and it's a discussion with the experts that we have on the panel, but we also want to hear from you, as Rosalind said, and it is an opportunity also to have that discussion and for you to ask questions. But beyond the event today, we also welcome, as do all ECSP leadership groups, input from external stakeholders. So please do get in touch if you want to contribute to the group. We hope to record more podcasts. So if you are interested in sharing your experiences, or if you know others who would be great to feature in a podcast, please get in touch. And also if you think there are particular themes or areas that would be useful to dive into in a leadership group like this, we also want to hear from you. So our contact details are just on the slide, which will be circulated afterwards. So today's event, as I said, will be building on the findings from the podcasts and provide room for discussion with our experts. I will be giving some key insights just after this on the podcast and what we found, some of the kind of key points, and then we'll dive into our panel discussion with our experts, including Robertson from RAP in the UK, Odile, as I mentioned, from the EPA, who's also on our podcast, and with Steve O'Reilly from the Rediscovery Centre. Unfortunately, Sari Lane, who from CITRA, who also hoped to join our panel, is unwell and unable to attend the discussion. We'll then have a quick wrap and close, and Rosalind's already covered some of our housekeeping. As I mentioned, we would really value your input for this discussion. Please add any questions to the chat at any time. We also got some audience questions in advance, which we've built in to our discussion, and we hope to get to as many of those as possible. And we'll open the floor, of course, as well during our panel, so we really want to hear from you. So as I mentioned, we had interviewed 3 experts for our podcasts, and I'd just like to share some of the really interesting findings that we had from those discussions, from talking to Ezra in Zero Waste Europe, Odile from the EPA, and Veerle from Circular Flanders. And what we really dove into was, how does behaviour change? How is it used in their work? And what are some of the common mistakes made? And also some examples of really successful campaigns and some of their recommendations. So we'll start with the mistakes. We'll outline 4 of the key mistakes that were discussed during the podcast. And this first one came up quite a number of times, and I'm sure it's familiar to many of you. A common mistake is the use of overly complex language or concepts that just don't resonate with people, that alienate people or confuse them. And a really fascinating example was given by Zero Waste Europe on this, which related to the People's Design Lab. And I'm not sure if many of you remember this campaign. It was a campaign aimed at getting people across Europe to vote on badly designed products from a circular economy perspective. I personally remember loving this campaign, but I am also already interested in circular economy and really engaged on this topic. But the campaign didn't have the impact that they expected with the wider community, because overall the concept of bad design and this link to circular economy didn't resonate with people. So it was a really good reminder, I think, and highlighted to me as a practitioner and just how easy it is to make this mistake around complex language and concepts. Another common mistake, or sometimes a deliberate strategy, is blaming citizens for not making the right choices. And an example given here was where during a campaign, marginalized communities were being blamed for poor recycling rates, even though they didn't have access to the right infrastructure. And this also raises questions about the role of individual behavior as opposed to structural behaviors or structural changes that actually support that behavior. And hopefully we'll come back to this during our panel discussion as well. The third mistake that we identified through the podcasts was making assumptions about citizens or businesses and failing to really understand our audiences when communicating, which can lead to bad design of campaigns, of course. And we will absolutely come back to this one in much more detail. And finally, a mistake that has been identified is the lack of resources to continue with programs or projects or campaigns, which creates a barrier, I suppose, to ongoing awareness, because you need to have that continuity to keep building understanding and influence the change. So moving on to the positives. And building on some of these mistakes, we mentioned not understanding the audience. So one of the key recommendations that came from the podcast was to better understand who we're talking to. We must not forget the citizen, and often we fail to ask them or to understand what citizens know already and what they need. So being able to conduct surveys or gather information in different ways can be extremely valuable in good behavior change campaigns. And picking on some of the fascinating examples provided by Odile, which I'm sure we'll hear more of during our discussion, the example of using video diaries to understand how people use leftover food, helped to inform them about their next campaign, because what it found is while many people save leftovers with the intention of eating them, they don't actually have a plan for them. So the next campaign for Stop Food Waste is going to be making a date with your leftovers. So I thought that was really insightful in terms of gathering information. And this, of course, really helps to better target our audiences and better I suppose, design campaigns to different audiences, engage people on specific needs, and to share simple micro behaviors that work for people. And perhaps Ideal, again, will touch on some of those micro behaviors during the panel discussion. An example of engaging people on specific needs from Zero Waste Europe was talking to parents, for example, about reusable nappies and nappies, just touching on different life stages. We also need to show there is a genuine desire for change. There's a lot of evidence to show this, and it's really important as well to acknowledge with the right infrastructure and right supports, people will take the right measures. So that was another key finding. We need to provide positive solutions narrative and not ask for too much. It's really important to keep things simple and not to set the bar too high or expect perfect behavior. And again, sorry, drawing just on the food waste example, for example, not expecting everyone to shop in the local organic packaging-free market, but to keep the message to simple food waste behaviours. We also need to provide really inclusive language and spaces. Sometimes our language can alienate people or play into preconceptions about what people believe something might be. So if we can avoid jargon, be very clear and very open and inclusive is also very important in engaging people. We need to support local communities and local decision making. And this, as Zero Waste Europe pointed out, helps to bridge the gap between individuals sometimes feeling powerless to take action and the sort of European ambition, which feels very distant at times. So the role of local decision making is extremely important. And a fantastic example of that was community-led composting in the city of Pontevedra, which went from just 9% of its waste being separately collected to having a completely decentralized community-led composting system for bio-waste with very impressive results. So the power of community is strong there. Finally, our key finding is around the value of storytelling, which I'm sure many of you are familiar with, and the power of hearing positive stories and case studies from peers. So as I've touched on a few case studies, there are so many in all three organisation websites of the communications hubs that we spoke to. I gave specifically the example here of the story of Hubei from Zero Waste Europe. Again, in this case, it was a campaign with families, and the zero waste families saw their waste disposed of reduced by 47% and their cost savings of around €1,000 a year. So really impressive case study, but there's so many others on that website as well. Brilliant examples as well, hacks and tips from Stop Food Waste on the stopfoodwaste.ie website. And so many other case studies from Circular Flanders as well, not just around citizens, but also around engaging businesses and public sector. So hopefully a good range for you to dive into. So
Claire, if I can just jump in for 1 second, we have one question in the chat.
yes.
I don't know if you want to cover it in the discussion maybe, but the question is about the findings. Do you do upfront tests if the message resonates with the target audience? And the other question was, who was the target audience? So maybe something for the discussion in a second.
Perfect. Yes, I'm pretty sure we will be touching on that indeed. That's great. Thank you very much. Super. Okay, so we'll dive into our panel discussion now. And I'll stop sharing these slides soon. Really interested in your experience as an audience as well. Please add your insights as well as questions into the chat, and we hopefully will come to them. So what I'm going to do to begin with is introduce the speakers and ask them to respond to our first 2 questions. And then we have a number of other questions, some of them building in the the questions we were sent in advance, and we'll have some time for open discussion as well. So starting with Odile, Odile has over 20 years experience in sustainability and environmental issues. She's an environmental science and food waste expert at the Irish Environmental Protection Agency and head of the Stop Food Waste programme, a very effective national campaign aimed at reducing household food waste in Ireland. So our first question for all of the panelists, and for you to start with, Odile, is what is the most striking example of circular behaviour change you've seen or been exposed to lately? And if you had to pick one, what would be the most important thing you learned from a mistake through your work on circular behaviour?
Thanks, Claire. Hi, everybody. I'm delighted to be here today. I think I mentioned it in the podcast, and I suppose it's a great example of how there's no silver bullet, and you're always going to need a combination of things. And I'm a great believer in making things easy for people. So you sometimes need to change the system as well as the hearts and minds of citizens as well. And I suppose it's a bit early to talk about it being a success, but I mentioned we're currently implementing a deposit and return scheme for aluminium cans and plastic bottles in Ireland. I know there are some in other European countries. And I think what's really interesting here is obviously they're trying to by having a deposit on these items is trying to bring about the behaviour change. But there's an awful lot of discussion around, people who already do the right thing. They already put these items in their bins at home, which is far more convenient than having to keep them separate, not squash them and bring them down to your local machine to recover them. And I think it's a really interesting understanding of how to try and bring about behaviour change, because there'll never be one size fits all. You've got to think about all the different citizens, their different approaches. And I think for me, the really interesting thing was that kind of annoying people who were already doing the right thing, which, you kind of forget that sometimes that people are, it's an added inconvenience. And this, I think it's referred to in behavioral science as stickiness, that is creating barriers for people that they're not doing the right thing, because there's just an extra layer added on that makes things difficult. And I think I mentioned this a lot, like not to ask too much of people, and sometimes it is that very aspirational thing, and it's quite a basic thing. Just recycle your cans and your plastic bottles, and you'll get money back that you've put on it. But it's just the whole discourse around it for me is really interesting to understand how and it leads on to your next question about the mistakes and that side of things as well. And I think I've mentioned this in ours when we started out with Stop Food Waste, very much, and I think a lot of people start this where you're trying to reach the general public and not understanding who are the general public. Like, the general public are made up of individuals. They're made up of you, they're made up of me, they're made up of all these people in the audience. They're made up of people who don't even, think about what we're trying to achieve or talk about. And sometimes I think, certainly on the food waste side of things, we get that a lot in kind of the comments from our embedded followers, like the people who really believe in what we're trying to do. And you might put out a really simple message about, choosing a small package, and it's like, why are you buying packaged vegetables? You need to, and it's kind of, our message is buy what you're going to use. If it's packaged, that's fine. Not always be trying to be this perfect person. And because most people, and we've done segmentation on our audience, so we've quite a core demographic in the middle. We've got this very busy family and there's about 1 million of them in a population of 5 million. They're quite a significant cohort of our population. And then we've another quite younger on the go, and there's close to nearly 1 million of them as well. So these are quite significant people that we're targeting. We've got the very converted people, and we think, obviously we can use them to show what good looks like, but the people in the middle need to be encouraged to make small changes to their behavior. And there is kind of a chink there where we know from what they've responded to in some of our national surveys that they are interested, but they're just too busy to even think about it. So it has to be this habitual stuff. And I know you mentioned, we talk about it later, maybe the micro behaviors, but I think this big mistake of, asking too much and then assuming the general population as one big mass of people that will just do, and also if only they knew they'll do the right thing, like that. that is such a difficult thing to assume, because that's not the case. Look, I know the things that I'm supposed to do. I don't do them every day, and this is the challenge. It's to kind of make those behaviors habitual, and that's what we're trying to do in our program.
Brilliant. You might just touch on that micro behaviors and put people out of their waiting and wondering.
Sure. Yeah. I suppose, one of the core things that, and, really for us, the big finding, apart from the leftovers that you mentioned, is the lack of planning. Like, people are not planning what they're going to eat. And, it's a very easy thing. You see it in a lot of campaigns, like, oh, make a meal plan, which sounds like, yeah, I'll just make a meal plan. But a meal plan is actually made up of, hundreds of different types of behaviors. You need to know the food you have. You need to know the food that you need to buy. You need to know where you're going to be. You need to know where your family is going to be. There's all these different behaviors embedded in that make a meal plan. So we kind of dissected it down. And like that, one of our campaigns was literally know the food you need to buy. And actually part of that does involve making a list. It involves checking your fridge, checking your cupboards, and, knowing what you're going to eat. So it was kind of just trying to break it down into these smaller behaviors. And even if you got someone to check your fridge twice a week to know what's in there and what you need to eat, that you're winning. So I think for us that was a big learning, is like just saying something really throwaway like make a meal plan is a huge ask of someone if you're not doing that kind of thing already. You have people who love it and do have the chart and do 7 days a week on the fridge, and and most people don't. So say for that really busy cohort that we're mentioning, the younger on the go, like all we would ask of them is know what you're going to eat tomorrow. So like that's a meal plan to a certain extent. So it really was just about paring back. And the frustrating thing about this is this all takes a huge amount of time, and we don't have the luxury of time. We're obviously trying to reduce food waste by 2030 and time is running out. So the temptation is to try and bundle all these things into one and say, oh, come on, we all need to do all of this all now. And I think we just need, and obviously there's elements of system changes and kind of community-based projects around food waste as well that needs to supplement a lot of the campaign side of things that we do as well.
Yeah, but that idea of breaking down behaviors and taking little steps, little interventions, whittling away at people's
one behavior at a time.
Behavior at a time. I think it's also in that getting things done approach, breaking things down into small steps. We do easily forget that. Look, that's terrific. Thank you so much, Adil. We'll come back to you with more questions shortly. I'll move then on to Mark. Mark is a lead analyst at WRAP, and his focus is on generating actionable behavioral insights to inform the design, delivery, and evaluation of levers for change. He applies his behavioral science holistically across the system to understand how WRAP and its partners can bring about systemic change that facilitates more sustainable behaviours and greater circularity. He has over 10 years experience developing, delivering, and evaluating citizen behaviour change programs in the sustainability sector. Thank you very much for joining us, Mark.
Thank you, Claire.
I'd love if you could start with the same two questions. What is the most striking example of circular behaviour change you've seen or been exposed to? And then if you had to pick one, what would be the most important thing you've learned from a mistake?
Thank you. Before I share a slide, I'll just, for those of you who don't know who WRAP are, I'll kind of give a little intro to WRAP. So WRAP is a climate change NGO. We're based in the UK, but have just recently opened offices in the US and Australia, and we work with policy, people and partners to bring about kind of behavioural change. So that means part of our work with our partners is that we have 3 core voluntary agreements. We've got Courtauld 2030, which is focused on reducing food waste, both in the supply chain and at home. We've got the UK Plastics Pact, which is focused on reducing single-use plastic packaging. And we have Textiles 2030, which is focusing on creating a more sustainable kind of circular economy for textiles. So my first example, and something I didn't mention about WRAP, is that we're probably best known for our work on recycling in the UK. And I'm not going to talk about what I think. Well, I think one of the biggest changes that we've seen recently, and I say recently, is kind of probably a little bit longer than that, but at least in my living memory of, used to take bottles and cans to bring banks at supermarkets, etc., before curbside collections came in for collecting that packaging, making it all a lot simpler. But I'm going to build on that and talk a little bit about some work that WRAP have been doing on plastic bags and wrapping. So what the industry would call films and flexibles, but in some testing that we did with consumers, they understand those items to be more collectively termed plastic bags and wrapping. It resonates more strongly with them. So we looked at combining kind of a systems change with kind of direct consumer communication. So through our plastics pack work with our retailers, we worked with them to introduce front of store collections for plastic bags and wrapping. And then building on that, we've run a campaign called Repeat the Cycle. And just like Apple trying to kind of get people to adopt that first iPhone, we needed to focus on those kind of early adopters. And for us, that meant focusing on those that are already most motivated to recycle and were doing it right at home. And so we built the call to action to go to WRAP's recycling locator and find where they can recycle their plastic bags and wrapping. So WRAP's recycling locator is essentially, you can plug in your postcode, search a particular item, and it will tell you where you can recycle that in your local area. And so all the collection points for retailers were uploaded into that locator, so we could drive traffic to there. And it was impactful. We saw a 46% increase in people visiting the locator, so finding that information that they needed. And then they went on, so 11% of the UK population recall seeing the campaign, and 87% of those went on to tell us that they changed their behaviour and recycled something from the store. So that's a pretty incredible kind of 4.7 million people across the UK. Then turning to kind of the one thing that I've learned, and I think the biggest thing is, so behavioural theory, and there's a few out there, but I'll refer to COM-B in this part, is that we need capability, opportunity, and motivation to change behaviour. And I think one of the biggest lessons we've learned is that we can't just focus on the M. We can't motivate our way out of this problem that we find ourselves in. We need to make sure that people do have the opportunity and do have the kind of the knowledge and capability to kind of make those changes. So I think there's a common kind of misconception, particularly those that aren't involved in behaviour change all the time, is that we can just communicate, we can just talk to people and ask them to make a change. And that will work for some, but you're going to have very minimal impact through that route. And just asking people to change will have kind of that minimal impact. Instead, the lessons that we've learned is, I think we need to change the context, altering the system, making the behaviour easy, or at least easier than the less circular or non-circular behaviour. And that can work either way. You can either incentivize and make the behaviour easier, or actually make the less circular behaviour harder, and then promote the benefits. Not everyone will be motivated by the environment, so looking for the social or environmental or personal benefits to that behaviour change, and communicating those to the right audience is absolutely key.
That's terrific. Thank you, Mark. And that really speaks to that issue around systems change and individual behaviour change. And clearly we need both, I guess, at the same time, but just the importance of making things easier as well. Super. Okay, I will move on to Steve then, and then I just want to come back to one or two audience questions that were sent in advance that relate to this point, and then hand over to Rosalind for our next question. So Steve is our policy and research communicator at the Rediscovery Centre and has worked here since 2020. He drives a host of communication, digital innovation and research initiatives that aim to demonstrate, educate and advocate for a transition to a circular economy across Irish society. He has a background in arts and studied social media, digital marketing and e-business at the London School of Economics. So Steve, to you is the same two questions. If you could share some striking example of circular behaviour change that you've seen or been exposed to, and if you had to pick one, what would be the most important thing you've learned from a mistake through your work?
Great, thank you so much, Claire. If I could actually be given the right to share my screen, I don't see that I have the, at least on these little buttons on the top, it's giving me a little no sign. So if I could be given the opportunity to do that, that would be great. But in the meantime, while I'm just waiting on that, I suppose the example that I wanted to talk about with regards to behaviour change that I think is particularly impactful is okay, perfect. Yeah, I see the opportunity to share my screen. Okay, perfect. Let me share my screen. Whoops, excuse me. Give me 1 second. Entire screen. Yeah. Okay. Can people see this okay? All good?
It's
okay,
not
perfect.
in full screen yet.
Okay, there we go. Okay, I can't see anyone there, so if anyone has any questions, just holler. So yeah, as Claire mentioned, I work for the Rediscovery Centre, Ireland's National Centre for the Circular Economy, and we are leading Ireland's transition to the circular economy. The impactful example that I want to talk about is an example. It's Killarney Coffee Cup project. For those of you who may have visited Ireland, you may have also visited Killarney. It's located, you can see Ireland, the Republic here on the right hand side, and it's this little red dot here at the bottom left of the island. It is it's a very beautiful town that's just sits alongside a national park, the Killarney National Park, which is just stunning to visit. It's a beautiful location. And what's interesting about what happened in Killarney is you've kind of got the triple bottom line right there in one town. You've got the social, you've got a very closely knit community, but you've got the economic benefits of sitting close to nature. They're very closely intertwined with each other. Like this is a community that thrives off the tourism that benefits from the natural beauty around them. So the community are really incentivized to make sure that this location, that the national park stays stunning. And it's interesting, like Zero Waste Scotland have done similar campaigns about Scotland is stunning, in order to keep the natural environment that brings tourism to the area in a pristine state. So the issue with Killarney was that there was 23,000 coffee cups per week that were single-use coffee cups that were being used, and a lot of them would end up in the national park. So what they did was there's a community there that brought everybody together, all of the hotels, all of the vendors of single-use coffee cups together, and they brought in a blanket bring or buy reusable cup scheme. And it was the first time in Ireland to do it, and it really, foreshadows a lot of the conversations we're having in Ireland right now about what we're calling the latte levy, which is the charge that would be added on to single-use coffee cups. But the reason why I think that this is a really interesting example, beyond the kind of the triple bottom line elements being so closely interwoven in Killarney, is, as Mark mentioned, changing the default, changing the context really is the best way to, or one of the best ways to change behavior. For those of us who were at the World Circular Economy Forum, you may have also been at the behavior change talk that happened there. There's a number of presentations and a panel discussion, and again, this kind of this focus on changing the default as being a really impactful way of changing behavior. And that's what Killarney did, you know, by making sure that there was a blanket ban on single-use coffee cups and the reusable scheme was the default, did have a really big impact there. So I think it's a phenomenal example to point to. And then beyond that, again, you know, it's collaborative, it's community driven, and also in Killarney, the immediate environmental benefits are visible to everybody as well. So I think it's a really good example of a circular behavior change that really has the benefits so quickly available and so visible. To move on then to the question about mistakes, and what mistakes could be made, you know, in changing behavior. I suppose we ask ourselves the kind of questions that are here on these slides all of the time. You know, who's ready for the circular economy? What do people want to see changed in the circular economy? What's standing in the way of behavior change? And what role can communications play? I know communications is just an element of it, but indeed that's the questions that we ask ourselves. I suppose if we don't answer those questions, mistakes will be made, and mistakes are made. And it harps back to the responses that came out of the podcast. You know, if we are making assumptions about the citizens that we're trying to work with, or if we blame citizens, or if we use wording that's too complex, like these issues were also shared on the podcast, you know. And I suppose you know, unless we answer those questions, we will make mistakes. And we were fortunate enough to work with the EU Life programme and the Department of Environment to empower us to really answer these questions. And I have a couple of slides I want to share. Essentially, there was a question earlier on about you know, quantitative studies and how do we actually ask citizens. Well, we actually did this work. We went out and asked Irish citizens through a quantitative study in 2021 to benchmark public awareness and understanding of the circular economy. What are people ready for? Where do they want to see it applied to? And on the back of that quantitative study, we followed up with a qualitative analysis of various focus groups of audiences that came out of that study. And then we repeated that same quantitative analysis in 2023, again, to see how the landscape had changed. And we used the opportunities that were presented by the Circular Economy Hotspot, which the Rediscovery Centre hosted in Dublin in 2023, to really share the findings and dive deeper as well. So if you bear with me, I have a couple of findings that I just want to share with with everyone here today that might also shape the discussion coming down the line. In terms of, I suppose, getting started, we wanted to know, have people heard of the topic of the circular economy in the first place? Have people even heard of it? And you can see in yellow here, this is from 2023, so the most recent one. 41% of Irish people would say that they've heard of the term circular economy before. And we benchmarked that against a number of other, I suppose, environmental topics, the more fringe stuff like ecological overshoot to greenhouse gas emissions on the other side. And you can see within the spectrum, circular economy is on the fringe elements of it. However, when you compare that to 2021, you can see here the lighter blue in 2021 and the darker blue is 2023. And these are percentages of what people have heard. The other elements maybe grow by 3 or 4%, 2 or 3%, but there was a 16% increase between 2021 and 2023 in name recognition on the circular economy. So we know that the momentum is very much behind us here. Like, now is the time to really be communicating about what the circular economy is. And in terms of who's more likely to have heard of it, we know that it's people who are based in urban parts of Ireland, who are from a wealthier background, and who are over the age between 35 and 49. So most likely they have more buying power as well. So they're the most likely people to have heard of it. We'll see later on in terms of the actual behavior that there's across the demographics, it's quite similar. So that's very positive. We then, and this slide just harps back a bit to what was mentioned from a learning from the podcast about description and wording about the circular economy. We provided the people in the survey with an explanation of the circular economy that you can see here on the right hand side. It's language that people in the circular economy world use all of the time, you know, talking about reuse, repair, remanufacturing, etc. 39% of people in 2023 would say that they understand it well or extremely well. It's an increase of 4 or 5%. But on the flip side of that, over 50% of people don't get it, don't grasp it, even when they are presented with a description of the circular economy. So we know that the way that we are communicating about the circular economy needs to change in order to facilitate people grasping the concept really. And just to give a couple of quotes that came back from the qualitative analysis, some people got it, some people were aware that it was about, you know, a self-sustaining entity, that it was about reuse and resource use, etc. On the flip side of it, when the term economy got people thinking about, you know, the way that money moves around the economy, people thinking about the way that, you know, goods are manufactured, and that would create wages, which allow people to buy more goods. Other people saying that it has to do with keeping costs down. Oh, sorry, I'm on a light that responds to my movement, so I'm just gonna move around a little bit here. My light comes back on. Thank you very much. Sorry. So in terms of the term economy, it is it may not be the best word to use there. But as the survey went on, you know, we people got a better understanding of the circular economy. We showed videos, graphic designs, etc. And most people would think that moving towards a circular economy is a good idea. So that's good. Once people got it, they thought that it was at least a positive step. We also asked where people may want to see the circular economy applied to, where they would like to see it most applied to. Plastics came out on top at 34%. So RAP, you're on the right track in terms of tackling packaging waste that you had mentioned. Food, Odile, and for Stop Food Waste, you're also on the right track. And on the flip side of that, you know, these are examples that are human scale, that are, you know, in front of us really. And on the flip side, construction, mobility, and transport, these are macro topics that people may not find more engaging, or that may not have a good concept of really, even though construction and demolition waste in Ireland is the biggest waste stream. You know, so citizens obviously are not aware of that. But people do want to see it applied to really what is on their level and in their lives. In terms of circular behavior, we asked you know, whenever possible, I repair household items that I have the skills to repair. In 2023, 54% of people said that they do that, which is great. If people would like to dive a little bit deeper into repair, the EPA have published in 2022 deep dive into behavior around repair, so I encourage you to do that. We also ask questions around lending, and where how I have lent a product to a neighbor or a friend for a short amount of time. 48% of people would say that they do that. And finally, where there's a choice, I pay to access or rent certain products rather than buy that product. 35% of people would say that they do that. And overall, 66% of people would say that they do one of those behaviors in their daily lives, which is an increase from 58% in 2021. You can see that below there in the brackets. So I suppose it's good to see that, you know, between the two surveys, you know, behavior is moving in a circular direction generally, which is positive. And I suppose just to finish off on a couple of influencing factors that came out of the quantitative and qualitative survey really, there were a couple of influencing factors that really came out of the discussions in the qualitative analysis. And they can kind of be grouped into three areas. You have the kind of more social and the kind of cultural norms. You've got, for example, convention and ritual, established convention, etc., which are really very much around, is it the norm to do these things? Are there particular times in my life where I would be more susceptible to circular behavior than others? On the flip side, you've got the more pragmatic stuff. You've got costs, you've got hygiene, squeamishness, functionality, the kind of things that, you know, and also accessibility. Do you have access to circular solutions? And then in between the two, you've got these new emerging ideas like fast fashion, which are kind of, you know, game changers, or they change the conversation, I suppose. And yeah, I suppose that's the getting into the psychology behind it. But yeah, I suppose it's just to come back to the question about mistakes, though, you know, unless we are answering these kinds of questions, you know, we definitely will make mistakes, and we are making mistakes, and it's extremely important that we do that work, we do that research to make sure that we're going in the right direction.
Super. Thank you very much, Steve. And I think that may have touched well on that earlier question in the chat, who is the audience? That's the Irish audience, but we're very interested in any studies from other regions about profiling from a behaviour perspective towards circular economy. And I can see too a question, can we share the source of that research? And I think if we can, we'll send an email around afterwards with the slide deck that accompanies that. I'll also put the EPA link, or Odile, if you want to, links to the amazing B&A research that into conducted by the EPA into repair and different topics as well, food waste as well. So there are some links and food for thought there. There was a question submitted from the audience in advance that just relates to this specific topic, which is, and I'm not sure if any of you have an example here, but they were looking for any initiatives or insights for specific target groups, particularly tourism, which perhaps you touched on already, Steve, in terms of the Killarney project, football and festivals. So I don't know, Mark or Odile, too, if you had any thoughts specifically on those target groups.
We haven't at RAP done lots of work with those particular groups, but there is one area that springs to mind that's kind of I'd say a bit of a standout kind of move to circularity, and that's just from a personal experience of I'm a fan of Northampton Saints in the Premiership at rugby, and I go there fairly regularly to watch games, and I can remember days of kind of seeing paper pint cups strewn across kind of the stands after a game. Now they've moved over to reusable, refillable plastic cups that you pay a deposit on, and now you don't see cups strewn everywhere. People collect up their empties, take them back at the end of the game and collect their deposits. And even those cups that have been left by people who are less bothered by the incentive of getting their cups back, there are lots of kids running around picking those up and taking them back to get some pocket money. So I think in those kind of closed environments, there's real great opportunity for increased circularity.
Super.
Yeah, if I can come in there as well. I know some work we did with local authorities around greening festivals, and even one of the first things was to try and segregate out potentially recyclables. There's cans, there's bottles, things like that. It was really challenging because obviously people are there to have a good time. They're not really, so yet again, it's about making it as easy as possible for people. This was before we kind of tried things around the reusable cup idea and a deposit on the cups, and then people would bring it back a bit, what Mark is saying, but you actually needed someone to stand over the bins to make sure that people were putting the right thing in the right bin, because and even just signage needed to be at eye height, not on the bin, but up where when you're standing at the bin you could see it at eye level, little things like that. And I spoke to someone who worked in the London Olympics as well, and they were saying they were trying to at least have the single-use coffee cups color coded that they could go into a bin, and the challenge there was working with the designers who didn't want them bright orange because they weren't in keeping with the colors of the event. So it's really interesting, all of these things, all of the different pieces of the puzzle that need to happen to make these things successful. And as you say, Mark, the closed environment, it seems like, well, if you can't get it right there, they're trying it on university campuses in Dublin, but you can't control the leakage, people coming in from external coffee shops and bringing things in that way. So it's some of these, they seem straightforward, and there's just challenges all around. Not, they're easy, they can be overcome, but it involves discussion, it involves collaboration with different types of people, and yet again understanding the audience on whose behavior you want to change, and what you want them to do. And you need to be really clear what you're asking people. One of the things we find with our communications campaigns, you can't just tell people this is wrong without giving them what they need to do, you know. And in particular, you can't be negative, you have to be positive. It has to be solutions focused. So, you know, we're working on textiles at the moment. I know, Claire, you're working with us on this, and, you know, we need to be really clear if we're going to go out with, you know, circular textile messaging. We need to be clear with the message of what people can do rather than just telling them don't do this. So that's another really interesting thing, I suppose, when you're starting these campaigns to keep in mind.
Great.
Yeah,
great example.
Indeed. I was going to just jump in there just on the example that Odile that you had mentioned about the Olympics. The Japanese Olympics, when it was held in Tokyo, were an exceptional example of circularity in action. And we did a newsletter that's on our website that featured all of the various initiatives that were taken in Tokyo during the Olympics, and it's just incredible stuff. But I'm unsure, just to answer the question that was asked about whether there was any market research done about the people that were there, and I'm unsure if that was part of it. And in addition, just the example was given there, I think also about the life on campus. There's a book that was published, The Little Book of Green Nudges. I think it was by the UN, but they have a number of examples from various campuses around the world of green nudges, essentially circular nudges that are happening around campuses. But and they showcase the ones that are successful, but I'm unsure if they do the market research behind it, unfortunately. But hopefully those examples can point you in the right direction.
It's a lot more than I expected on the specific target groups, tourism, football, festivals, etc. Thank you also, Ernest, for sharing your example indeed of the project here in Dublin with Bohemians and Crick Park. Rosalind, I'll hand over to you for the next question.
Thanks very much, and really interesting discussion so far and lots of great examples. I think we've discussed and heard quite a few barriers so far, but I'd be really interested in exploring a little bit more of what you were saying about the context in which people are choosing to use certain choices or make have certain behaviours. So I wondered to the panelists, are there any other either behavioural or maybe more in the systemic side, if there are other barriers that you'd like to highlight that we haven't already discussed? I'm just thinking of what you said, Mark, there about not just tackling the motivation side, but thinking about the context, the opportunity side, and so on. Are there any other barriers, or also on, I guess, the side of abilities and skills?
Yeah, absolutely. I think I'll draw on another RAP example, a much more recent one, if I may. So we have identified that removing packaging from fresh produce, not all fresh produce, some things are soft and, you know, things like raspberries and strawberries, not such a good idea, they get bruised. But things like apples, potatoes, carrots, and pears, those sorts of fruit and vegetables, removing packaging is likely to lead to a decrease in both packaging waste, but also food waste. So our research suggests that though removing packaging allows people to buy closer to their needs, closer to what they need. So we are working with retailers, but also working directly with citizens, and we, as Steve pointed out, the importance of kind of undertaking research. We conducted last year some research, some quantitative and qualitative research, where we conducted a consumer survey, but then also followed people around store, in their home, and to understand kind of what their experience of kind of shopping is at the moment for fresh produce. And we found that there is a big opportunity barrier. Lots of supermarkets don't sell much produce loose. Where they do, it tends to be one variety, but the packed varieties will kind of have, you know, there'll be 4 or 5 different varieties of apple in packaging, but just one loose. So if you don't want that Braeburn and you want pink ladies, then you're pretty stuck. You have to buy the packaged. But there are other barriers to people buying loose. So what we were seeing is that people generally didn't recognize the benefits of it. It wasn't salient at all with them as an option. People want to buy what they need, but didn't see buying loose as a way of doing it. They found comparing price really difficult. So packed items are priced by pack, but loose items, there's a variety in the UK at least of pricing by weight or pricing by item. So it makes comparison just really difficult. And then there's the assumption that, you know, if I can't actually work out what the price is, then I just assume that packed is cheaper because buying in bulk is cheaper. So, you know, buying for 6 apples is cheaper than me buying the 4. And then there were also barriers around quality, that perceived freshness, that kind of hygiene thing around people kind of touching the fruit and vegetables. So there are lots of other barriers, but it's a big area for us to focus in on. So we have started working with the retailers to increase the opportunity for people to buy loose. It's in our roadmap or pathway to make that comparison of price much easier. And when we talk about ease, it's not just the physical ease of doing things, it's the you know, the mental ease of doing things as well. That, you know, that's just as big a barrier as the physical. And then we need to communicate the benefits. So understanding which audiences will respond to a price message about, you know, actually buying 4 apples and only using the 4 apples is cheaper and better value than buying 6 apples and throwing 2 away. There's, you know, and so finding that right language to resonate with the right audience as well. And so we've also been conducting some trials with some retailers in the UK to understand what messages it might resonate with their consumers.
Thanks very much, Mark. I think that actually resonates quite closely with a couple of the audience questions that we've had, so maybe the others can pick up on this as well. There were a couple of questions about how do we build trust amongst consumers, because we've talked a lot about those kind of front runners in terms of consumers. They're on board, they know what to do, and they kind of trust in the system of these new opportunities. But then there are others that may be feeling a bit of distrust. It might be linked to not understanding fully. It might be to do with the opportunities. Someone also raising the fact that there's been a bit of a kind of muddy discussion around the actual benefits of material substitution and recycling, and kind of things coming in from the industry that then make people think, actually, is this worthwhile? Am I doing the right thing? So I don't know if you've got any thoughts on how we address some of those barriers about the trust in the system, the trust in taking forward these new actions as well. Maybe going over to Adil, is there something in the food context that you've come across in this area?
Yeah, I think one of the key things is make sure that there's a consistent message, you know, because this can be an issue where, you know, you have one group telling you buy this, it's better, and another group saying, oh, buy this, it's better. And, you know, we do a lot of work with all our stakeholders, including the retailers, to make sure that, you know, what we've identified as the most important message, be it meal planning or be it something around buying loose, or, you know, that everyone is giving that similar message in the same way, so that you're not confusing with all the different messages. And I think for us, you know, one of that big things, and even just talking about the barriers, the freezer is the best tool you can have at home when it comes to food and not wasting food. But a lot of people might just have a cool box in their fridge, and you have to kind of be careful when you're talking about use your freezer, and, you know, and it's not necessarily for batch cooking, but just, you know, if your plans change, freeze. But like, some people don't have that big freezer, so, you know, that is something that we need to be really mindful. Or the confidence around food, you know, that food hygiene, it's such a big issue, like, you know, and it's why people throw things out when there's dates on food, whether it's, you know, we've got in Ireland, we've had really clear understanding of the difference between best before and use by dates, but the behaviours don't translate. So even though they even understand that you can eat food after best before date, because there's a date on it, they still throw it away. So I think working together and like that to change that, let's call it the system, but you know, it's the choices in retail, it's, you know, it's the confidence at home, you know, educating kids to be confident around food and understanding, not necessarily expecting them to educate their parents. I think, you know, there's a lot of pressure put on school kids to educate their parents, bring the right behaviors home. But I think, you know, that the future young adults will know what to do with food and be confident around, you know, smelling food, tasting food, checking food is okay and still good to eat. I think, you know, but it's really important that there's kind of a consistent approach to asking people to change their behaviors and not that they're not hearing conflicting messages, that they're confident they're doing the right thing. And, you know, we know from our studies that people overestimate the importance. Like, people tend to think, you know, if they recycle, they're going to reduce climate change, you know, and like that, whereas there's obviously more impactful behaviors. So some things around that, you know, evaluating which behavior is better, we need to be more kind of open about those things as well, I think.
Thanks very much, Adela. And I think that's really interesting what you're saying about, on the one hand, having the consistency of messaging and so on, but also using that as a way to kind of build confidence and people making those choices and so on. Steve, thinking back to your statistics that you had from your research you've been doing, can you think in terms of this consistent messaging and then bridging that to the practical, are there any examples or ideas you have of how you start to break those practical barriers through that kind of consistency of understanding?
Yeah. I think actually it one of the examples I would give, and it kind of also builds on that earlier question about building trust. Like, one of the things we're doing now is trying to recontextualize. Oh gosh, excuse me, my light has gone up again. Motion sensor light. There we go. Sorry about that. So one of the things we're trying to do is recontextualize particular circular behavior in one part of life into another part of the life in order to kind of bridge the kind of, you know, bridge that gap. For example, like, you might rent a bike on holiday, you might rent a car on holiday. Why not do that all of the time? You know, I mean, you know, trying to, yeah, use those examples that are happening that you do already, but just recontextualizing them. Or we know, for example, like, there are particular parts of people's lives where they are more circular than others. So trying to think about, you know, if you're, I was having this conversation just yesterday, like, if you are a baby or if you're a child, secondhand clothing is very much the done thing. Why not do that in all parts of your life? Or indeed, especially with regards to textiles, you know, one of the things about squeamishness with regards to secondhand clothing, we can think of an example of the lovely hotel bed sheets that have fantastic thread count. People jumping into their hotel bed sheets, but God knows what's been going on in there, you know. So it's a question of, like, just trying to recontextualize the in order to bridge that gap and to bridge that trust, I would say, is we would say a good way to do that. And the second way, you know, there was a question earlier about nudging, you know, in order to not necessarily bridge the gap, but to just sidestep it entirely, to make it so easy for people to be circular that it's not something that they need to have much thought to do. You know, I mean, if there was another question about the cohort of people that are not so motivated. I mean, if what we would find, you know, if healthcare or housing or bigger social problems are an issue for you, you're not going to have the headspace to care about the environment, really. And we saw as well during COVID, interest in the environment went down because people's heads were just full up with COVID. So to try to make it as was mentioned by the other panelists as well, it's as easy as possible for people to engage in circular behavior really is the message I would bring forward.
Thanks very much, Stephen. I think you addressed a few of the different questions that were coming up in the chat here about getting those less motivated groups on board, trying to tackle some of the barriers they have as well, and then thinking about, how do we make it easy for people, definitely, and the nudging and so on as well as a tool to use. On this point, I will pass back over to Claire, who will take us through the next questions.
Yeah, I was going to go on to a next general question with the panel, but just conscious, I suppose there are quite a few messages coming through in the chat, and I wonder, does anyone want to put their hand up at this stage and ask a question directly, or one of the questions that have already been posted around nudging approach and methodology, or motivation, or any other area? Does anyone want to raise their hand at this point, or will we keep going on to the next one?
Good morning. Yeah, I was the one that raised the first question about the audience. So one of my observations is that if you talk to people who are already very involved in circular economy, environment, etc., is that they have a totally different motivation and involvement level than the big audience. And I think where we can make biggest gains is at that audience. I think the people who are already very motivated think carefully about what they buy, when they buy, if they what they have in their refrigerator, etc. I think if you want to make a real impact in behavioral change, you have to find ways to get that biggest audience involved. And I'm curious in, yeah, what is your view on that, and how can we do you think we can reach that audience?
Thank you. So who would like to go first?
I can jump in.
Perfect.
Just from the now this is just from the Irish context. Like what we found from our market research is that there's indeed those two kind of pockets of Irish audience. There's the people who are ready for the circular economy and people that aren't. You know, the people who are making, especially, and when I say who are ready, I mean at the point of consumption, like who would be circular consumers really. And these are people who are thinking about the ethics of their consumption, who have circular options available to them, as was mentioned, who are from urban areas, from who have buying power, etc. And then there's people that aren't, and as was they would be people who access to alternatives may not be accessible to them. They may not have buying power. They may be actually interestingly younger. I mean, a lot of people think that younger people, like, this is environmental is their issue, but these are also people who don't have the buying power to purchase a green markup. Or who also may think that taking a trip across the globe is part of their coming of age as well, taking that transatlantic flight or whatever. But anyway, I mean, I suppose to answer your question, the assumption, I suppose, is that the bigger group is bigger. Sorry, the less motivated group is bigger, and the group that are motivated is smaller. But in Ireland, that's not the case. It's more or less a 50-50 split, which is good from our perspective in that there are easy wins. But indeed, it's about making sure that the circular examples, as was mentioned by the other panelists, are relevant for people for different reasons. We definitely cannot assume that people are going to be motivated by ethics or environmentalism alone in order to change their behavior. Absolutely not. So yeah, we need to really strategize to meet those needs, those social and economic needs, really. And to also think about the various, like Odile is working specifically in food, to really think about the various pockets of their lives, to think about how are they consuming different products in different ways, because they're each circularity is so different for each industry, and for each method of consumption as well. So yeah, to answer your question, just it's extremely complicated and it's extremely complex, and the more complex and the more testing you can do, really the better, I would say. Okay. Or the more specific.
Where I'm coming from is that I'm living in the Netherlands, and you see here in the Netherlands that the people are so involved and are considered by some other of the, especially the people who are not so interested, as a kind of elite. And we call them the people, the latte, and they have oatmeal and a special type of coffees, etc. And so, and the point is that that if the approach is coming from that area, I think you're not have the right methodology, and you're not appealing to the people who you want to appeal to. And my background is marketing, and I think we're now in a situation where you need what we call in marketing crossing the chasm. You need to get to that huge big audience that is not interested, has different priorities because of the way their life is going. You talk about urban areas, but I think if you look in many big cities in not only Netherlands but Europe, the majority of people have different issues than think, oh, how can I become more circular, or things like that. So
yeah, the priorities. Yeah, really interesting. And Odile, not to pick on you, and I'm sure Mark, you also have things to add to that, but just that point around elitism and some of the things you raised in the podcast around not setting the bar too high, I suppose, for people.
Yeah, and look, I think certainly when it comes to food, we're lucky about 40% of our population aren't doing the right thing, but are slightly interested in doing the right thing. So, you know, and we've finite resources. You know, one of the challenges when you're in the public sector is you can't blow huge amounts of money on marketing budgets either, you know, so it's how to best use the resources that you have. So they are the focus. Now, there are about 20% of the population that are disinterested in food waste, and you have to find what you can ask them to do. Maybe it's just putting food waste in the right bin is the message for that cohort. But I think, you know, for us, that busy cohort who aren't currently doing the right thing is who we are focused on, and we're very much, as I said, breaking it down into really simple things that can resonate with them. So you're not asking them to go and buy in the farmers market on a Friday morning every month, because that's where, you know, the aspirational lifestyle. So, and, you know, really interesting example is, you know, we were dealing with, you know, keeping veg fresh for longer, and we were looking at broccoli, and one of our messages, you know, was poke holes in the plastic wrapping that comes on your broccoli to let it breathe when it's in your fridge. And like that, obviously the people who were doing the right thing were, oh, why are you buying plastic packaged broccoli? But, you know, it's a fact of life that some people go into the supermarket and they buy broccoli that has plastic on it. You know, there was another message about choosing loose green broccoli to make it last longer. But so you have to really acknowledge that and similarly, we have these really interesting debates with the people who are kind of developing our social media. Sometimes they pick really niche ingredients to promote, you know, and you know, there's a big discussion at the moment there. Well, we're talking about lunch, you know, and they're, oh, we need to talk about couscous, and you're like, oh my god, like how many people actually eat couscous? You know, we need to, or bread, you know, they're talking about, you know, buying sourdough bread at the market, and you're like, most people buy a sliced pan, and we need to recognize that. While, you know, so I think it's really interesting some of the debates we have with each other, you know, and it's kind of, do you buy that? I don't buy that, you know, but and not think that what you do is what everyone else does either. So I think for us, you know, we're lucky, and as I said, that's what we're focused on for food waste, but there's completely different segments for obviously different waste streams or consumption streams that we're dealing with, and it's really important. Maybe like that, the disinterested on food waste might be motivated. And actually, one of the really interesting things, sorry, now, just that Steve mentioned, we've done some in-depth work on repair, and there's a young male demographic who are mad into repairing mobile phones and things like that. So, you know, that's just what they do, and they're, you know, they're normal people. They're not, you know, particularly motivated by the environment. So there is kind of a window into circular behavior. So I think it really depends that you'll find something maybe that you can target that group with that aren't interested in one thing, that maybe you find something else that they might be.
Thanks very much, Odile. Mark, did you want to add to that at all, or?
Yeah, thank you. I think there's two points. I think one, building on what Adele was just saying about that right message, that right kind of audience thing. And we've done some segmentation work in the UK. We found kind of 8 segments, half of which are broadly environmentally focused, half of which aren't. And there's a cohort that one of our segments doesn't believe in climate change. And there's going to be one of those everywhere. But that doesn't mean they're not doing some of the things that we'd like them to do. In fact, they are when looking at clothing or products like washing machines and those white goods, they're looking for durability, and that's brilliant. Maybe we just have to talk to them about about that, and get them to adopt more circular things there. So same in the way that they buy their clothing, they buy it to last. So there's with enough research and enough kind of evidence, there are ways that you can identify in order to kind of talk to people about what resonates to them engaging with the circular economy. I think my other point, and gonna sound like I'm harping on about the importance of context in this as well, is that we do live in a world where in a linear world of buy, use, dispose. And if we don't change that in terms of the systems, we will never get whole population adopting the circular economy. So the power of the communications will get people to buy into that new system, but we have to change that system to get the vast majority of people engaging.
Right. Okay. Call to action there, and it kind of ties into the next question, which is, where do you think this field needs to go next? Very much what needs more research or experimentation. And again, just bringing in a question that was sent in advance, that consumer experience is driven by emotions. So what responsibility or guidance does new legislation propose for companies to inspire emotions at the end of use? And also maybe just to say, while we're getting some answers on this, please continue to put your questions in or raise your hand if you want to speak. And we're also really interested to hear what is the most striking example of behaviour change that you have heard of. So any interesting case studies that you might want to share. So who would like to start? Steve, did you want to come on to where do you think the field needs to go next?
Yeah, I mean, I think to answer that question, it's really depends on what country you're looking at, really. Like, I mean, Ireland is a specific context. The Netherlands, as we've seen, is another context. Like, it really depends on what in terms of what needs to happen. Be really specific about where and for who. And I think, you know, the initiatives like the European Circular Economy Stakeholder Platform, who has organized this talk, has, you know, taught us so much, and the collaborations that we've had have been so beneficial to us that, you know, I think the more of that collaboration is definitely needed in order to so that other nations can learn from each other, other contexts can learn from each other. Absolutely. You know, I do think that the collaborative element is definitely needed. And then to answer your second question on the kind of legislation about emotional and maybe more human legislation, the Irish government had published pretty recently the design principles for government and, you know, for public services that are based on human-centric design. It's based in, of course, design thinking and that approach. So if people are interested in maybe the more human elements or the user-centric policy, definitely worth checking that out. You can find it on I think they recently, it was the action plan for designing better public services is on the Irish government website. Definitely worth checking that out. Yeah.
Thanks a million, Steve. If you could post a link to that in the chat.
Oh yes, of course. Yes, I'll do that now.
Adil or Mark, do either of you like to jump in? Adil?
Yeah, I can. Yeah, I think some of this is, you know, we obviously we're talking here. I've been talking a lot about, you know, the communication side, but, you know, the intervention side, and, you know, there's some hopeful news on a research project that we funded recently, where giving people certain tools to use in their home as well as the communication is more likely to bring about behavior change and lasting behavior change. When you go back 6 months later, they're still doing the same thing as well. So I think, and that's the collaboration that Steve is talking about there, and kind of the multidisciplinary side of it as well. Like, we've done a lot of work with sort of design in terms of designing solutions for people in homes on how to make those behaviors more useful. And obviously then, you know, the policy side of things needs to provide those nudges and the context where these things are happening. So you know, I think talking to each other across disciplines and understanding a bit more, you know, I think not forgetting citizens are at the heart of what we need to do. And you know, it does happen often where policy is made in a vacuum maybe, and they don't consider this actual citizens. And you can see it a lot with the, you know, the pushback against some of the climate things that are happening at the moment. And you know, so I think we need to understand more about that, and understand, you know, we're all human beings, and you know, we don't like change as a general rule. So it's how sometimes maybe, you know, we need to just not lose sight of who we're asking to change behavior. And you know, we've done some interesting stuff in relation to the coffee cup levy, the latte levy as well. And as well as looking at citizens, we've looked at the actual coffee vendors who have serious concerns, because for them, coffee is their brand. Like, selling their cup of coffee is why people go to their shop. And you know, reusable cups don't give that consistency in the quality of the product. You know, a lot of they haven't quite hit the mark on a reusable cup yet, really. You know, sometimes it's like drinking out of a sippy cup, or it's you know, and the vendors are really worried about that it's going to diminish the quality of their product, and that's all they have. So, you know, even understanding that, where they're coming from, and even how are they going to be, you know, some of them are little hatches. How are they going to wash cups that people bring themselves? And, you know, so even that, it's a really good example of, if you're going to implement something, you need to take on board all of these things. And obviously, at some point, you have to make a decision and go for, this is the best way with the least, the least impact, if you like. But it's just really important that we don't lose sight of the impact on people when we're asking people to change the behaviours as well.
Sounds like an obvious one, but certainly not. Thanks, Odile. And Mark?
Yeah, I was just going to build on that point, and the importance of co-creation with your partners, with policymakers, with businesses, but with citizens as well, and kind of doing that, co-creating the kind of next iteration of how we kind of see the world, one behaviour at a time, because that's all you can really think about at once. The whole concept of circular economy as a general topic is just too broad to kind of, certainly to engage citizens. But yeah, taking one behaviour at a time and just co-creating the kind of solutions.
Brilliant. Great, thank you. I'll hand back to Rosalind.
Thanks very much. Just looking at the time, I think we've got a few minutes left. I thought this could be a good chance to kind of have a bit of a overview of what we've discussed, and if there are any final examples that people want to share in the chat, please feel free to do so. Just reflecting on what we've discussed today, I think there are kind of three main parts of it. I think we started with some really important learnings that you've shared from the panel, which are really fascinating. One of the key messages I would take from that is that, of course, the general public is made up of individuals, and that there won't be this one-size-fits-all approach, and it has to be a combination of different measures. And although it's complex, we have to keep it simple, and we have to keep it easy for people who are actually taking part and changing their behaviours. One of the things that really struck me was this element of trying to make these behaviours habitual. So doing it one behaviour at a time, but making it part of the everyday, something that maybe people are already doing. And as you said, Mark, not just tackling that motivation, but thinking really hard about those opportunities and abilities to really make that happen. There was loads of inspiration coming through for ways that people can take it forward, and I'm sure everyone joining today has got something they'll take on board and think about in their own work. One of them really important being about this consistent messaging and building people's confidence to be able to do these changes, making it easy, not setting the bar too high, and really recognizing those realities. I think, as you were saying, Odile, about, you know, some people do buy wrapped vegetables, but how can we still make some sort of change in their lifestyle so it's a simple thing that they can achieve? Yeah, and I think also thinking about those who do some of the behaviours we'd like them to do, but for other reasons, they don't always have to have the same motivations behind it. We're still contributing to kind of making this a default, making it a norm in society as well, and having to actually think there's so much we can do with individuals, but we do have to have that context and the system change behind it to support to get the vast majority on board. And what we were just hearing about in terms of the next steps, I think some key sort of principles were coming through from what all of you said there. Collaboration and learning from each other, really talking across different disciplines to have those joint learnings and moments of inspiration. Two different approaches as well, thinking about human-centered design for the user-centric policy development, but also not forgetting to consider those actually delivering services as well. Like you were saying, with the people who have to wash the coffee cups, how can they practically manage that as well? So keeping it really grounded in the reality. But I think one thing that's come through everything is actually not forgetting that citizens are at the heart of this transition, and we have to really make it easy and doable for people across the population. So yeah, those were some findings I thought we had. I'd like to say a massive thank you to our panelists. Adil, Mark and Steve, you've been fantastic today. We've learned so much from your experience and all the examples that you've shared. So I'm sure everyone joins me in thanking you massively for these contributions and really inspiring us going forward. And then I will pass back to Claire for some final words.
Thank you, Rosalind. Very hard to summarise the discussion that we've had. But there will be a recording available on the same page that you registered on, I believe. And as said, we'll try and circulate if we can to those who registered the different resources that were discussed. Thank you to everyone who participated, who asked questions. And as I said, please do reach out to us if you have any suggestions for further work in this leadership group. So thank you very much for joining, and hopefully we'll hear from you soon. Thanks. Bye, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye.